but let's go live. Senator Balint, do you have
I
any?
think we should always make a recommendation and be explicit.
No, that is absolutely the case.
That was a given.
The question is the timing of it, with the federal law. And I noticed on Senate Appropriations calendar, there was no reference to H315 on there. I don't know whether she's planning on voting it anytime soon. There's a couple of other emails floating around on new kind of add-ons to H315. So I don't know what the timing is. I'd like to not necessarily rush this if we don't have to rush it. That's all I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, it is on the calendar for today in Senate Approps.
Oh, it
for
is?
committee discussion.
Okay, that
Starting at 2.
That must have changed then.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll plow ahead then.
Agendas have a habit of doing that.
Say that again?
Agendas have a habit of doing that.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Senator Brock, we're going to talk about GAP recovery grants in the next half hour, and then you have to go, I know, and we'll probably just generally talk about a little bit about UI for 15 minutes afterwards, but we'll fill you in. No earth-shattering things will happen in your absence, but you can be with us till 9, right?
Till 9, yes, and then obviously I'll be back after the 4.
Okay, great. Okay. So welcome, Commissioner Goldstein. So let me start off by understanding sort of in a general sense where Vermont is in terms of economic recovery grant. This is the most general of questions. I've heard rumors that we've done fabulously compared to other states in terms of proportionally how much money we've gotten out the door so far. Is that your understanding as well?
That is, yeah. I mean, I don't have all the data from other states. I just from anecdotally, our state did much better. I think legislature acted more quickly. I heard at the end of last year, there were some states who hadn't spent down their allocation. So I think overall we're doing better. I think also on the business side, we were very much focused on those in need and were able to measure that. So it wasn't just an across the board $5,000 or $10,000 grant. And so I think it's reflected in the tax revenues. It wasn't the only thing, the discretionary money, but it definitely, businesses and people were still stayed hired. And we did the best that we could. We benefited from the small state minimum, and I think we're benefiting from that again in this next go around. So yeah, I think very good. Having said that, that's great and that's wonderful. Comparatively speaking, there are still businesses, as we know, that are struggling, that we're not able to get anything from these grants or from the federal assistance for whatever reason. And we know that the one pocket which is most prevalent is the new business.
Okay.
Both the PPP as well as our program had that date of it was like February. I think the first time around it was February 28th. This time around, when I say this time around, the December bill made express requirement that they had to have been in business before February 15th, 2020. So it leaves out all the people that started last year. And that's why we would urge for the
So that, as I understand, an H315 is the priority group that you
correct
process applications from. And that to be in that group, you have had to receive no assistance from the federal or the state up until this point?
Right. As that first 30-day priority. And then afterwards, we would give funds to folks who did receive prior help, but still could demonstrate that there is need. Because we know of cases where they received a small PPP or received a grant from us, but are still in a very bad way. So
looking at that first group, I know that in H315, I assume the rest of the committee has seen the language. It talks about a cap on the size of the grant of this tranche being 3 months of fixed costs, rent, utilities, et cetera, or $150,000, whichever is less. That's the maximum. The grant can be much less, correct? How are you going to determine the size of the grant?
So we are anticipating requiring the actual bills and invoices for the fixed costs. So we will, folks would have to upload that. We would see the number and pay accordingly.
No,
So-
I think what I was trying to ask, that's the maximum 3 months of
Right.
fixed costs, right?
The maximum is 150 or 3 months of fixed costs.
Whichever is less. So,
May I ask a
so is
question?
so are you saying the maximum is essentially the grant? They'll never get less than that amount?
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying.
Ask
Okay.
a question.
It's not written that way, but okay.
Oh, okay.
Senator Brock?
With respect to the way and the manner in which the grants are being expended, in both cases, they are a first come, first served. Is that correct? That provided they fit within the category?
That is correct. First come, first serve with the 30-day priority that we would only pay those who didn't receive anything first.
In a way, what I know it's certainly been questioned about that methodology, because typically there's a limited amount of funds available, and those who are at the end of the train don't get anything. And the question is, does the methodology that we're using favor the better educated, the more sophisticated, the more people who have connections, the more people who have professionals helping them prepare their materials? And those people, particularly things like New Americans, for example, are at the bottom of the line and at the end of the train consistently. And just the question of fairness has certainly been raised. What would
Yeah.
you say?
I think H315 also sets aside funding for technical assistance for the Association for Refugee Resettlement, the Association for Africans Living in Vermont, for that very purpose. And in other words, to make sure that there's help to those either through language barrier or other disadvantaged status to get access to grant programs and to financial assistance support.
But doesn't that kick in at the same time that we begin the funding process, so that they're getting technical assistance for funding that's already gone?
Well, it's not already gone. I think that they're authorized at the same time. And then the way I'm envisioning it, there would be a lag, like we would have to sort of figure this out, launch it, and at the same time make in our announcements, our guidance, our website, everything, we would list all the technical assistance providers. Our phone unit would be equipped to send folks to these different providers to get help. Like last time we had Center for Women in Enterprise did a really spectacular job in bringing people through financial statement preparation for the application. So
How much time would you anticipate they would have for the agencies that are doing the work to gear up and be able to begin providing help for those who need it?
Yeah, every situation is so specific. It's going to depend on whether the applicant has a computer. It's going to depend on whether or not they have computer skills. Like, I don't know. I can't speak to it. I think last time the first time around, we did first come, first serve. The money was out there for 3 months. So there was time. Obviously, it was a lot larger sum of money. It's so situation specific about how in order the records are of that particular business. I think this time around, it'll be less about creating financial statements and more about making sure that they filed their taxes. So I think a lot of the help will be in the make sure that the taxes are filed.
Well, what I basically hear throughout all this is anecdotal claims that folks who are in these categories of marginalized businesses or New American businesses have been disadvantaged because of the way the first come, first served. And the question is anybody looked at that and produced any data of what we've done in the past to say, is that or is that not true? And secondly, as we start this new program, knowing the history of the claims along those lines, is the department prepared to do anything now as it begins this process of measuring whether or not these allegations are true?
Yeah, I don't know how to measure whether or not allegations are true. I think
Well, you can
during
measure,
the
information regarding the owners of the businesses, how long they've been in business, whether or not they are parts of marginalized communities, and when they got their claims dealt with compared to the majority.
we have not done that level of analysis, no, but we do have data on how many minority-owned businesses received grants, but I don't have a data analysis of how long it took them to get paid versus anybody else. No, we have not been able to do that.
Well, as I say, the only way really to address these are claims that we hear anecdotally with a fair degree of frequency. I don't know whether they're true or not. And if we don't have some way of measuring this, particularly when we know that claims have been made in the past and we know prospectively we're going into a new program, well, this is a great opportunity to set something up to know whether or not these claims are or are not true for the future. And I just something to think about it, perhaps get back to us as to whether or not there is a methodology that the department could use to help define that.
Senator Robb.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Senator Brock and I are exactly on the same page, but I have had really similar questions about not understanding if in the 5 million set aside for BIPOC and women-owned businesses, if 2.5 million went to BIPOC-owned businesses, if on the women-owned business side, they helped women of color, and we can have a sort of full demographic picture of who was helped, what the unmet need looked like, you know, what technical assistance they needed. It felt like such a rich opportunity to not just have emails and contact information for these folks, but to really understand what are their unmet business needs, what are their needs for technical assistance. I have heard several times without substantiation that we were not able to spend the full 2.5 million on the BIPOC business side. And so some of the money went over to the women-owned business side. I have no idea what happened. Like, I haven't seen a report of the demographic breakdown.
Right, and,
size of
and
business,
we are working on that data. And I don't know, Brett, if you've got a copy of that most recent report, and we could make that available. It's not a report. It's a massive spreadsheet that has lots of different data points on who got the funds and what the remaining unmet need is. There was a small residual left in the minority set aside that blended into the women-owned business bucket as per statute, as was lined out in statute. No, we have not done analysis on every single business that we gave money to. It's over 4,000 businesses. So we understand the claims. We also understand that over 50% of the funds went to small businesses between 1 and 4. We also understand we've been heavily criticized for how difficult it was to get this money, but we also understand the critique and the microscope that we're under to verify every single business. So all of those things are true. I don't know how we do more in-depth data analysis and deliver. We can do it after the fact. As we know, we're still in the midst of it. And, you know, maybe we get someone to do a study on that. I don't know. Again, we have a subset of the businesses. This is not all the entire business community. I think from the technical assistance providers that we did engage with, the problems were really about whether or not the business already keeps track of their finances. If they did, it was okay. Didn't matter whether they were small, BIPOC owned, whatever. If they were organized, they were able to do it. If not, it took more hand-holding. And, you know, some of these technical assistance providers were just great. And others would just end up at our call line, and we would work with people to try to get them through it. But it was really hard the first 2 times around. We didn't have a full year of data. So a tax return wasn't going to help. They had to create financial statements. And so that was really difficult for a lot of small businesses.
So
And there is no
Let-
set aside.
Senator
This particular
Clarkson, we're gonna-
program.
let Senator Clarkson
So
ask a question, but we
I'd
need
love
to,
to-
we need to focus on this $10 million right
Right.
now.
I had a question specifically for Joan, but just to add on the data, of course, the micro business will add additional data, and that should be from Sue Minter. We could get the capstone, the
The
caps,
Embrace. Mhm.
yeah, and micro business. They will have the data on a lot of the BIPOC and women-owned businesses in the micro business sector. And my guess is that the blending of the women and the BIPOC grants, my guess is both communities were served by those programs. But it will be interesting to see the data. Joan,
So-
my question for you on this grant, on the 10 million, is how many businesses, and you may have told us this before, but how many businesses are you expecting to serve? I know it's a bit of a guesstimate, but how many businesses are you expecting to serve in this $10 million new business
Yeah.
opportunity?
I think we're expecting hundreds, not thousands. So it's hard to say. We just, when we looked at this and we saw that there were over 400 new rooms and meals tax filers, as an example,
Right.
maybe a subset of those. It's really hard to say. And with 10 million, and again, we generally serve the smaller businesses, so the grant amounts will be smaller. We'll see. I mean, I think that the trick here is when we launch it, if there aren't these parameters, we'll get overwhelmed with applications, which means it'll take much longer to get through the whole process. So that's why, getting back to an earlier question about first come, first serve, we think that's fairer, because if you come in, and again, 30 days, we'll just pay folks who didn't get anything. It'll be fairer to do it that way. And then thereafter, each week when we do a payment file, we'll prioritize according to whether or not there was help before.
So Joan,
But-
I assume you've seen the critique from the state economists and from the state auditor on the targeting issue. And I notice in the bill that there's a factor of economic loss. How are you defining economic loss?
Yeah, we're going to define that through tax returns. So we're going to look at the net loss because we can now, because we have a full year of 2020 to see if they ended up with a net loss.
So profitability, taxable income is what you're going to be looking for. And you're
Yeah,
gonna
we'll be looking right at the business,
you're
the
gonna
business
require-
net income.
And you're going to require, even though it doesn't say it in the law, you're going to require as a part of the application, tax returns from 2020.
Correct. It's
Right.
the only way that we could verify.
Right.
So just to double check, because, and I don't know, David Hall, you might jump in here. I think whether you think what the statute says and what the Commerce Committee believed, were they giving the same size grant out to every body, which is 3 months of those fixed costs that are demonstrable, or were there other factors to be looked at as to the size of the grant? I think we're hearing Joan say they're just going to give out the 3 months, and all those other factors don't go into calculation of the grant size. They go into eligibility, but they're just going to do the simple way of looking at 3 months worth of, and I guess, so let me ask David that first, but then Joan, be prepared to answer the question. If you're going to give 3 months out and you're going to look at tax returns, what if the tax returns don't show a loss equal to the 3 months of fixed cost?
Yeah, it's if 2020 doesn't show a loss, that is the lowest priority. Like, I don't think we'll end up with money. There was a talk before about don't eliminate those without a loss, but then if there's leftover money, those who have a loss as a percentage of their, sort of pro rata according to their size, we could establish that. But really, this is about loss. So if you don't have a loss in 2020, it's going to be difficult for you to get a grant. That is the way we've been talking about it in terms of how we're going to actually administer this. I think there's enough businesses that had a loss in 2020 that we could serve. I mean, you might have a less of a profit in 2020 than you had in 2019. We get that. But to me, that's not the screaming baby right now.
The terminology that's in the bill has been around for several weeks, if not a month at this point, and it piggybacks on past programs as well.
Mhm.
Do you have anything in writing? It says you have to establish written guidelines and bring them back to the legislature. Have you started to prepare those at all?
We're working on methodology. We don't have it etched, obviously. We're not sure where this is at. But no, we haven't. No, the first thing we have to do is understand how much this is going to cost us once we finalize this methodology. And we'll have to get the costs from the consultants. We have to figure out how much the system has to be changed. We have to line up, instruction, technical assistance. There's a lot that has to happen. So no, we have not done the guidelines just yet, but we've done a draft of how we think we're going to administer this. So yeah, it's the very, very first step of doing a guideline is first let's us figure out how we're actually going to administer.
Okay, so Joan and I have talked on the phone a couple of times in the past month. So would you have any problem in terms of us adding to what the House did, that economic loss, that the requirement is that a 2020 tax return has to be filed with the application and that it has to show a net loss of income. And I don't know how, if you're talking about loss of income, are you showing they pay no taxes on that because they're in a negative thing? Or are you going to try and get monthly income statements that show a drop from when they started throughout the year? How would that work?
No, we're not going to do monthlies. We're going to look at the 2020, if it's a Schedule C filer, what the net loss is, the net income. If it's a 1065, I don't know which line it is, but we would probably outline which line we're going to be looking at to determine the loss.
So
It's different for different business structures, but it's the actual business loss.
Okay, so basically, if someone files a tax return for 2020 and they show $5,000 in profit for that period, they're out.
So here's another thought, not to confuse matters, but and I don't know how the committee feels about this, but because the new federal bill is on its way, right? The thought is, could we set up a program right here, right now, that if we were to get additional funds from the feds, that we could kind of recapitalize this grant program without having to go through a whole other change of application, change of requirements, change of guidelines. In other words, could we establish something right here, right now that could take care of these others? So for example, if we take care of everybody who had a net loss in 2020, could we then go to the next tier and we know that these people exist, that there's a loss, but it may, maybe they earned $1 in 2020. Can we then prioritize them, sort of a last priority, but since we'll be getting another chunk of funding, to see if there's help that we could give them, just because there's additional either costs that they repivoted their business or they created an outdoor patio or whatever the improvement is to their business. So the thought was keep the language broad so that we could then pivot accordingly. We could just establish it's a different funding source, but we anticipate there'll be a line of people applying and they're not going to determine, oh, well, is this federal or is this state money? Let us, do that determination, but not to have to go back and reinvent the wheel again. That was just a thought, like to try to keep it broad. We'll figure out the priorities. If this 10 million is spent down, it's spent down. And then when the next round comes, we could apply it to this program, that we prioritize according to those who didn't get anything before, then we prioritize those who had, who got something but still have a net loss. And then the last would be those who don't have a net loss, but have a loss when you compare it year over year in terms of what they were able to earn. It's just a way of not making this such a distinct, separate program and then going back to the drawing board and creating another program.
Well, I think part of the issue, as you well know, it's been very public, is that there has been a tension between getting money out the door and having an elegant way of prioritizing or targeted money in the best way. And they've been coming up against each other. And here we are with another tranche of money where the legislature is trying to weigh in. It sounds like this is tighter, perhaps, in terms of looking at tax returns and law and defining what economic loss is. So I think we need to nail down this, because we have no idea how much money is going to be available. If we set up a $100, $200 million problem for businesses with the new federal money, or even larger, we may have all different parameters we may want to look at. So I think this is still a work in progress.
Remember also that we're going to require that they either were ineligible for federal assistance or applied and was denied. And that should follow irrespective of how much money we get to the state. In other words, that's set up as a prerequisite.
Okay, one critical question before Senator Brock, I think, needs to leave. In terms of what you know about the new federal money, is there any problem, do you think, of using that money to replenish our general fund for money we put out the door if we do on this program? I mean, I think everybody is concerned that why would we spend dear general fund dollars right now if we have the opportunity in a few weeks or months to do the same thing with this new flexible federal dollars?
Yeah, I would propose that. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much discretion we'll have, but it looks like there'll be a lot of discretion. But I have not read it in its entirety, so I don't know that for a fact. But people in administration will be looking at that, and I think that's something that we would propose. I mean, of course, if there's federal money that could replenish the general fund, let's ask for that,
okay,
or let's allow for that. This way,
David, do you know the answer to that? I know in the mortgage assistance thing we looked at, they found specific language in the federal law that says you can pay back the state any monies that they put forward to help people with their mortgages back to January 1st. I don't know if the federal law on economic recovery grants says anything similar.
David, I don't know the answer right now. I can look it up.
Yeah, probably hard to find, but okay. Well, Senator Brock has left us. Does anybody have any further questions for Joan? Do you have any other anything that jumps out at you in terms of either the letters from the auditor or from our state economist about concerns that this money could be better targeted within the business community and also for other business-related needs like job internships or worker training, or getting the money out the door in that fashion? Have you?
Yeah, I understand that there's been a lot of narrative around how this was not targeted, and the data that I look at does not actually substantiate that narrative. So I want to establish that first, that, mainly small businesses got this. For the most part, the unmet need is generally in the accommodation and food services. No one would argue that those are the most in need. The way that we handled 2.0 was based on unmet need. Even if you disagree with the methodology about utilizing revenue, no one could doubt that a change in revenue or a 10% capacity, you're talking about tremendous need of these businesses. So I take issue with the fact that people are saying it's not targeted. You will see when you look at the list of all the recipients that these are mainly small businesses for the most part, struggling, closed, adversely impacted. Does that mean that no one got it that didn't deserve it? Of course not. It's a humongous program. It had tremendous scale. So that's the first issue. The other is that the way that we are designing this, it is about people who couldn't get help elsewhere. So I don't know how much more targeted we could get. I would kind of challenge those folks who critique it to give us some ideas rather than generalities. I'm sure we'll get some ideas. The auditor is still auditing our performance in 1.0 and 2.0. I'm sure we'll get other ideas about how other agencies did it, how other states did it. I'm sure we'll hear that, yes.
Well, one thing that I think at least there, it sounds like there's a change here, has to deal with how you're going to, well, not only calculate the benefit, which I think we need to fix that language if you're just giving a fixed grant out based upon 3 months of fixed costs, but also I think we would want to codify what you're saying is economic loss, because as you know, the past program, and this is a criticism by both the auditor and the state economist, is you were just looking at reduced receipts. So economic loss could apply to somebody who had a very profitable business that just became somewhat less profitable. That could be economic loss. That's not what you're saying this time around.
Yeah, not for this time around. We don't have that much funding, and we won't have as many applicants, I think, you know. Yeah, I know everybody wanted us to do net income last time, a lot more analysis. I think because we'll have a smaller subset, we should be able to do this, and we have 2 full years.
So just before I let you go, just to be clear on this one thing. First of all, I don't know, David, are you still there? I think he may have had to leave.
I'm here.
Are you still here?
Yes, David's here.
I don't have my picture up here. David, so am I correct in terms of how I read the law that there was, that the 3-month thing did not determine the size of the grant, only the maximum grant?
That's correct.
Okay.
Since S350, the very first bill, the way it's been set up is there's basically, you know, a set of gates you have to pass through to get into the universe, and then there's a maximum amount of any potential grant. But the amount of the grant itself has always been in the discretion of the agency, and this is no different in that respect. As you said, there is a cap, and that is either 3 months or the 150,000, whichever is less. But that the legislation as it came out of the House does not say what the grant amount will be. It just says what the maximum amount of a grant could be.
So, Commissioner, if you looked at a tax return and it showed that, and the backup document showed that there was $10,000 a month in fixed costs for rent, utilities, and everything like that. So that would equal $30,000 under the bill that passed the House. And the tax return showed that the company only lost $5,000 for 2020. You would give them 30,000?
I think what we would do is we would do somewhat of an unmet need calculation. So remember if they received PPP before, we would add that back in, since that doesn't show up as a revenue item on their tax return. And
I'm talking about the first group which I assume would be. the
Right.
majority. They
Yeah.
wouldn't qualify at all if they receive PPP.
Right. The first group, yeah, we're going to pay them. The reason for paying them 3 months of fixed expenses, and that was our intent, that would be the award calculation, was because if they're adversely impacted, and you'll see the other determinations and other criteria or prioritization that the House put in, is that we would have to take into consideration all those other things, right, as part of our, how do we prioritize who's in most need. It's really to keep them going for another 3 months. We use the 3 months because we're thinking hopefully by summer, more and more people will be open, so this would be less necessary. But we were not anticipating doing monthly P&Ls. That ended up being really not only problematic for the applicant, problematic for us as analyzing, what's really going on. And then you get into a reconciliation between tax returns and financial statements. Not only is it lengthy, it ends up being applications go back and forth. It's not really any way to run it. So we thought a fair way would be an equitable way, is irrespective of what your fixed expenses are, we're helping you out for 3 months.
Why do you need all those other factors then? If you've already determined the size of the grant to somebody who lost some money?
Well, because I think we're going to have to do some ranking, right? Someone who lost 5,000 as opposed to someone who lost 100,000. We're going to have to look and see, how did this, how does this compare? Or were they closed? Maybe they weren't closed. Again, we want to bring this back to COVID. So I think that the other things help us.
In the previous grants, you say there's some recommendation that you be assured that the money is used for the purposes of reopening. Is that like a good faith thing, or is there any auditing or checking or requirement on the part of the applicants that they actually need this money to reopen?
I think that the certification that they attest to is something like, I am open or plan to reopen as soon as possible. I think it says plan to reopen when I am able. And then it does not make representation that you have to use this money in order to reopen. That was 1.0 and 2.0. Remember, that was CRF money that was done as revenue replacement. So the idea is that they could use it on any business expense. So there was no checking to see, did you spend it on this or that? This is different. I mean, this is really about, we're giving you money to spend on fixed expenses. We could do a monitoring exercise to ensure that that took place.
Okay.
So may I jump in with a question,
yes.
Michael?
Please.
So Joan, I have 2 questions, and for you and Brett. One is, do you have any inkling that any of this federal money will be for exactly this group of people, for new business, because I know it's been a national issue also. So I'm just wondering if you have any notion that there'll be some money coming down for this crowd.
So the what I know so far on the federal, and I'm by no means an expert, there is a set aside for restaurants. It's called restaurant stabilization.
Right. Yeah.
From what I've read, it looks like they have to compare to 2019. So I think the new businesses get left out again. Now, having said that, this discretionary pot that the state gets, I think, is discretionary. I don't know what string's going to be on that. I don't know, but it looks like in addition to the restaurant stabilization, in addition to this small business credit initiative, there's going to be this small state minimum that we get. And the question is, what do we do with that, right? Do we, if there's still business need, let's say we launch this 10 million thing and we get oversubscribed, tenfold, I don't know, but at least we'll have that data. We'll know who's applying, what their need. We'll have information, and we'll be able to then determine, look, there's a demand curve for this, and this is why. We don't know, are they going to close the PPP truly on March 31st? Is that going to be extended? You
It
know, if
sounds
it's not, if it's extended, that's great. If they run out of money, will they refund it? I don't know. If not, and people didn't get to it, or people, whatever, were denied, then yeah, the state has a role to play. So I don't know, you know, it looks like we will have discretionary funds that we could design as we see fit. But,
Right.
you know, it's going to take a little bit more analysis, but there are some set asides within the bill in addition to the state.
Right,
discretion.
the statement. So my second question is a little harder because new businesses, as we know, are a little dicey. So how many new businesses start every year in Vermont? How many actually keep going? Because I know there's a huge failure rate, or not failure is strong, but you know, a huge number of new businesses don't succeed. Is there any way in this to go, you know, to I don't know, to screen it all for those businesses that are more likely to succeed than ones that aren't? Because I worry about our giving away these precious general fund dollars to businesses that ultimately were never going to succeed and wouldn't have succeeded even if we were healthy, because so many first new businesses don't succeed.
I guess it
Senator,
depends. Yeah.
I'm sorry, can I field that one? It's Brett Long, Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Economic Development. Let me give you an example. We had somebody who applied in the second round who had bought an inn during COVID. And the prior owner wasn't willing to give them the financial information for the inn prior to their purchase. So that we didn't have 2 years of data to be able to compare. As a result, they didn't qualify. So it's, you know, we consider that to be a new business, but it's really an existing business where they didn't qualify because they didn't have the information.
But also, Senator, if I could pick and choose winners, I'd be a much, much more wealthy woman.
Yeah, right. No, I
Yeah,
appreciate that. But in this subset of businesses,
I don't know how we do that.
I know.
But I think it is important to you know, basically let us have the flexibility to impose some kind of priority based upon those kinds of criteria.
Yeah. No.
The other thing I wanted to mention is to go back to the chair's point at the beginning of the conversation, is that it's important to focus on the fact that we're setting up this priority so that people who have received any assistance in the past wouldn't qualify. And the senator is absolutely correct that a lot of businesses that were able to be sophisticated enough to apply probably did. So we're much more likely to be satisfying the requirements of small and less sophisticated businesses this time around because they didn't receive any assistance last time around. And it's quite possible that that's because they weren't able to meet the reporting requirements, for example.
When you get into the second tier, I know there's still the priority even after that 30 days for businesses that have gotten no monies. I have to say that I'm still confused with what the law says and what your interpretation of it is, and what you would do if somebody's 3 months of fixed costs that they want covered is more than what they claim as their economic loss. It sounds like you're saying that, well, you would look at these other factors and you may give that person somewhat less, which is inconsistent with saying that it's a fixed amount of money that everybody gets, regardless of whether they have that amount of loss or not. So I think we're just going to have to dig a little deeper to understand that and what the committee would like to suggest in that regards. Anyhow, Senator, we're going to have to move on to UI for a few minutes because we have an urgent bill we need to deal with. I really appreciate the time, Commissioner. I know this is challenging and there's a lot of uncertainty. The federal law, while a blessing, also presents some challenges in terms of how we put money out the door. And we look forward to continuing to work with you on this. Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair, I just want to let you know that
just want to let you know, I think we'll be in a position to distribute the many tables of data that we've accumulated today, tomorrow type timeframe to you.
Oh,
Great.
great. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks,
Senator Rob,
Joan.
did you have
Bye-bye.
something you really wanted to ask before we move to Commissioner Harrington?
Well, I will email folks. It is longer term if more money comes in. Just really wondering how we help single mom sole proprietors. Like, I just feel like we keep hearing about, just businesses, but there's a lot of women who are losing out in the economy who might have tried to retool after losing their job. And I just really want to think about how we can help with UBI or a small business for women. Like, I just want to get more visionary as well if we get more money beyond the 10 million.
As a committee member, you have that right to be more visionary. I've got to move us along. So thank you.
Thank you too.
Yeah. Okay. Welcome, Commissioner and Damien. We've got like 10 minutes. Forgive me, Commissioner. I'm going to turn it over to Damien to explain, probably for the second time, what we're trying to do with a bill that is now S-110, I believe. We were going to try and get it through all stages of passage today, but I felt that was a little bit unfair, and we could still get this. The goal is to get this to the governor's desk by Friday, which is definitely doable, even if I present it on the floor tomorrow, which is my intent. So let's just use this 10 minutes for Damien to explain on this PUC issue, what's up.
Great. Good morning, everyone. So what we've got here is in the Continued Assistance Act, which passed at the very end of December, the Congress authorized an additional 11 weeks of pandemic emergency unemployment compensation. And the other thing it did is, because of the way the program was set up, so the way the benefits worked before the Continued Assistance Act was you went on regular UI. When your regular UI benefits ran out, you shifted to PEUC for 13 weeks. And when that ran out, you shifted to extended benefits. And then you would be at the end of your benefit year after 52 weeks of benefits. So what they did is they said, because we're giving you an additional 11 weeks of PEUC, and we know that a lot of people's benefit years are expiring after this passes, if your benefit year, which is the year from your first claim for unemployment benefits, expires after December 27th, then what we'll do, or what can happen, is the state can elect to pass a law which makes you eligible to continue with the additional weeks of PEUC that you're eligible for, and delay the onset of your second benefit year, provided that you have remaining PEUC eligibility, and the benefits in your second benefit year would be $25 less than, or more, less than they were in your first benefit year. So I'll give you an example of this. Typically for claimants, your weekly benefit amount is based on the wages you earned in the first 4 of the last 5 completed calendar quarters. So if I filed a claim last April 1st, or let's say last March 25th, what they would be looking at is the first 4 of the last 5 completed calendar quarters. So those calendar quarters are the 4 calendar quarters from 2019, and then the last calendar quarter of 2018. And they would count the wages I earned in that last calendar quarter of 2018 and the first 3 of 2019 for my weekly benefit amount. That leaves the last calendar quarter of 2019 and the first calendar quarter of 2020, which is all I need to establish a new benefit year, provided I earned some wages during 2020 after I filed for unemployment the first time. So if I've met the monetary eligibility for a new benefit year, but I'm only going off of 2 quarters, or maybe 2.5 quarters of wages, my benefit amount is going to be very, very low. So if I went to a new UI benefit, I could see myself dropping from, let's say, $350 a week to $150 a week before any additional federal benefit. What this allows the department to do is to say, you're going to see that drop of more than $25. So we'll keep you on PEUC, which is 100% federally funded. So the claimant benefits by getting a higher rate of benefits, and the state benefits by having less demand put on our trust fund. And we can put off that benefit year until, hopefully, with the bill that's now likely to pass the House in the next day or so, that could extend through September, because that bill is going to add another 24 weeks of PEUC benefits. So now we can delay putting those people back on the UI trust fund for several more months. And that's what S110 does, is it authorizes the department to ignore the regular provisions of law that would require them to put people into a second benefit year at that lower rate of benefits, and instead defer that benefit year and leave them on the PEUC benefits. Do you want me to walk through the bill, or is that a good enough sort of overview?
I would like Senator Clarkson just to repeat all of that, please. She's speechless. First time in her life, she's speechless.
I'm not speechless. I have a broad notion of it. And if there's a test before the floor, I might get a C.
The key things here are, it allows us to keep claimants at a higher rate of benefits and protect the trust fund.
That part I get.
That's the key.
And can you just talk a bunch, and maybe we can hear from the commissioner as well, as to the urgency of this and what would happen if the state doesn't exercise this election by Friday?
Yeah, so what we're seeing now is, now that we're getting to the 1-year anniversary of the state of emergency in the state, we're getting to the end of people's benefit year, or a significant number of people's benefit year. There are presumably small numbers of people who have been exhausting their first benefit year since the new year began. But now we're going to start seeing large numbers of people exhausting their benefit year. If we delay passage of this, what happens is the department has to follow the existing law, which would require them to put people on a second benefit year. And then if we make this retroactively effective, they would have to go in and manually reopen each one of those claims, and then reassess whether those individuals qualify for PEUC, then figure out how much additional benefits they need, and do all of the bookkeeping associated with that. And I'm sure the commissioner can add more details, because that's kind of the high level version of what they have to do. But they have to take each of these claims individually and reevaluate it, and then move people over. And what that results in is additional administrative burden for the department, but also delayed benefits for individuals, similar to what was happening at the outset when the system was overwhelmed. Again, people would be seeing a low benefit and then waiting potentially a long period of time for the department to be able to process their claim and give them the additional benefits they would be entitled to.
So I'll let the commissioner speak, but the estimate we got was that back of the envelope was at least 1,600 people might fall off their benefit year starting next week, because that's when businesses started to get shut down and people started to get laid off. And those people, even if we took our time and the normal course of things, we might take several weeks, but even if we took an extra week, those 1,600 claims would have to be reopened manually to get them their full benefits. And it may also take some time for them to get those full benefits in their hands, right? It may be delayed even if they ultimately got it. Is that correct, Commissioner?
That is correct.
Okay.
We're looking at like almost 10% of the current unemployed? The current universe is roughly 20,000 people still on UI, is that right?
Yeah, in different stages of UI. I think there's somewhere around 10 to 13,000 on PEUC right now. Just so you know, that number in the first week is like 1,600. When it goes to the second week, it's like 5,000 additional. So there's an exponential increase from week 1 to week 2, just because of how people filed in March of 2020.
And we need this law regardless of whether the Biden plan passes. The Biden plan just
Right.
makes it even more valuable, right?
Correct.
But what if the Biden plan didn't pass? How many more weeks would people get on PEUC under existing law right now if we pass this bill?
Yeah, if so, Cameron, feel free to jump in here, but my understanding is there are 2 provisions, but essentially it's 11 weeks. So, or April, the week ending April 10th, whichever comes first. So, you know, in many cases, you'd probably only be seeing an additional 3 to 4 weeks of impacted benefits if people started to fall off, if you will, and need to requalify.
And PUC is sort of the last extension program out there.
Correct.
Now, after that, whenever that ends, whatever the feds do, then people have to reestablish a benefit year at that point. And
Correct. And they would, you know, Cam, jump in here. I know there are a couple caveats there, so feel free to jump in.
Well, let me cut you. I'm going to cut you off, Cameron, because we have to go to the floor. We'll
Sure.
see you after the floor. I don't know how long the floor will be, but keep an eye on us, and we'll see you like probably 10 minutes after the floor or something like that.
Yeah, we'll be
No.
ready.
Thank you.